You know, the clue to all this was summed up by the 1960s guru Marshall McLuhan, who had a number of very crazy ideas, but he once said something which I think is absolutely true. He said, "We drive into the future with our eyes firmly fixed on the rearview mirror." So what are people trying to do? What was television? It was the home delivery of 16mm film. You know, what is the new digital? Well, first of all, it's the 35mm image. 35 is 1,000 lines in the old money. It's a couple of K. Now we're going for 4K. 4K is the limit of human visual acuity. In other words, it's like sound. If you record above 22 hertz, you know, you're not going to hear it. A dog will hear it, you won't hear it. It's the same with visuals. What we're looking at in reality is supposed to be about 4K, except it turns out not to be, and people can still tell it's a picture rather than reality. But, you know, there's a limit. There are limits to what we can see, and we'll go towards those without questions. What will we do with that when we get there? Well, we'll do Hamlet.
The independent cinema industry has been a part of society in the UK ever since its emergence in the 1960s. However, compared to the mainstream, it has met a number of challenges to which technological development has been key.
The cinema started out life as a cinema in 1922, and the main building dates back to the 1890s when it was used as a cricket pavilion, as general sports pavilion for the local hotel. In 1922, the owner of the hotel decided that she would like to provide a cinema for the people of Woodhall Spa and indeed for herself. So she enlisted the help of a gentleman who'd just come out of the First World War. He was called Major Allport, and together they converted the building into a cinema. It ran as a single-screen cinema for many years. Major Allport took ownership of it after the first couple of years, and he ran it until his death in 1973, so he ran it for 51 years. In 1973 it was taken over by James Green, who owned it until the present day. He made numerous improvements to it. He had another screen added in the 90s. He installed the Compton organ that we still have today. And he saw the change over to the current digital technology.
Well, Lincoln Film Society started up in 1953. An idea that grew out of some people who wanted to put films on that weren't getting shown on a commercial basis, and it's been going ever since. I think there is a demand for this kind of cinema in Lincoln. It's a university city now, and there is no other place in the city where people can come and watch films that don't fit into the mainstream category. Everybody knows that the Odeon provides plenty of opportunity for people to watch the commercial cinema, but there is an awful lot of film work being produced from around the world, some of it exceptional, and it doesn't get any sort of exposure in the city unless the society is there to try and encourage it and put it on.
Fans of independent cinemas have expressed a desire for a more community-based viewing experience. By accommodating this, they offer the viewer an intimacy rarely found in their multiplex counterpart.
Broadway Cinema was actually a Baptist church. To begin with, it was built in 1839. It was a church all the way until 1947, when a dwindling congregation had to shut. And also it needed fixtures around the roof to be sorted out. After that, the Nottingham Cooperative Society bought it. They then opened this it's the first cooperative educational centre within the country, with a 500 capacity seated theatre. That opened in 1959. That obviously continued through the 60s and 70s. And then around about the late 80s, it was bought with a consortium of 4 local media organisations, which was then renamed Broadway Media Centre, Broadway Cinema. And the first screening was held on the 31st of August 1990. I think the diversity of its programme is makes it distinct from other cinemas around the area. I think it's a combination between must-see films and the spectacular, and also independent and specialised films. Is definitely kind of progress, and I think it's one of these distinct things around the area, because you don't have an independent cinema within Nottingham that shows foreign language films, blockbusters, comedies, national theatre, opera, live performances. I think it's all the combination kind of gives it that distinct feeling, which separates it from the major chain cinemas, which usually show just blockbusters. And I think that's what we're trying to provide, not an alternative, but like a more breadth and depth for our audience, more choice.
If you're so marginalised as some of these smaller cinemas are, I think you start to reach a reverse point in terms of technological change, right? I mean, obviously you can't go back to the silent cinema, although National Film Theatre manages to have silent screenings with live musical accompaniment, but that's obviously extremely specialist. So, I don't think you can get that behind sound. But just as people are crazy about LPs and claim, superior whatever analog recordings, what's supposed to be more real, I've never understood that myself, but there you go. So in the same way, people could turn around, and indeed many people do, and certainly of my age in the business, saying, come on, this electronic, it'll never work, give me some celluloid, I like to see how much film I'm cutting, I mean, there's a certain nostalgia about that, and maybe that can be translated. If you're the last cinema standing, as it were, that's showing celluloid, I mean, you need an infrastructure, obviously. You can't get celluloid already processed in Britain anymore, it has to go off to Switzerland or wherever. Kodak have just stopped, after 130 years. So, yes, that changes that moves the goalposts. But within the possibilities of the goalpost not being moved, I think you can have an advantage by having back projection, or by saying, hey, this is, we're going to show you the real print, etc., etc.
I think that the way that the cinema is set out, with all the traditional curtains, light fittings, seating, all of which have been sourced from cinemas around the country when they have modernised. The lightings come from cinemas in Birmingham, Manchester. I think that helps us retain the traditional cinema-going experience. I think if we were to modernise, to strip all that kind of thing out, put in modern lighting, get rid of the curtains like a lot of modern cinemas have, I think that would destroy the uniqueness that we have. We'd become just another run-of-the-mill cinema, and in an area with such a low population, I think that would be our downfall.
I think the cafe bars here are a really important part of Broadway. They obviously, the profit that generates there, it supports our cultural purpose. But I don't think the food and drink alone is what attracts audiences here as such. I think it is a people-centred organisation, and I think the cafe bar is an extension of the cinema. I think it's all-encompassing for the cinema. Obviously, we allow our audience members to take drinks into the cinema, and we also provide a space for them to work. We have a lot of people who bring in their laptops for coffees and stuff like that. It's a meeting place, it's a social place for people to kind of come and drink. So I think it works hand in hand with the cinema. I don't think it's how Broadway's had to adapt. I think it's a kind of, it's not a side part of the cinema. I think they are as one, really.
I think it was a reaction to going to independent places that had experimental film, and they were such kind of hushed houses of reverence that I just thought, well, you can have a bit more fun with film. So the Kino Club was a reaction to that, to actually make a venue where we could show film, have some bit of fun with film. It gradually turned into kind of a cabaret-esque kind of evening, which is a little bit like we're doing at Kino Bingo tonight. But the difference, the original Kino Club had live music, improvised music that played to found footage, my film. We'd invite a filmmaker every once in a while to put something on. So it was an attempt again to break, in a way, break out of the independent cinema sector, which we found very kind of stifling in terms of what we could do. My first projections, I kind of go way back. My father was a photographer, and I had a cousin of my mother's who was a filmmaker, and I think when I was about 14 or 15 years old, he gave me a box of found footage, and I actually started cutting film with tape and scissors then and putting stuff together. So one of my first film shows, I cut a hole in my dad's darkroom wall without him knowing it for a few years, and we projected through that as a projection box to all my friends, invited them around. And yeah, it was actually 16mm then, so with playing records and found sound and things to them. So okay. People come along and they're not quite sure what to expect, but the point of Kino Bingo is give people a way to look at film differently. How with Bingo we have 4 different images on the screen at once. So it's all about recognizing shots, it's all about memory, it's all about seeing clues on the card, seeing it on the screen. It just provides an opportunity for people to think about film in a different way, look at it in a different way, and have some fun on the night as well, and perhaps win a prize or two.
In 2013, we celebrated our 60th anniversary, and we organised a film festival that ran for the whole of June. We were able to bring celebrities like Jim Broadbent to the city. Of course, he's a Lincolnshire man, so it perhaps was a bit of home from home, but nevertheless, we managed to get him. We brought in a whole range of films. We did a Hitchcock retrospective. We showed classics like Lawrence of Arabia, which last year was re-released to celebrate its 50th anniversary. It was a very, very big undertaking, but it went down extremely well. I think if I have any ambitions for the future, it would be to try and establish a film festival in Lincoln, perhaps not on such a large scale, because, as I say, the last year's lasted a whole month and we had something on every day. But I would like to think that we could get a film festival established as a regular part of the calendar, and people would be able to look at their diaries and think, oh, it's Lincoln Film Festival this year. That sounds good to me.
With the rear projection technique, from an audience point of view, you're looking at an image which is coming towards you through a translucent screen rather than an image which is a reflected image off a matte or silver screen. Nowadays, it doesn't make any practical difference. The image quality is much the same with either technique. But back when they used to allow smoking in cinemas, a rear projection technique was superior. Because when people were smoking in the auditorium, you'd get the cloud of smoke rising up into the building, and in conventional projection, the beam of light had to pass through that cloud of smoke, so you'd see the beam of light. It would dilute the image slightly, so perhaps soften the focus, that kind of thing. So when smoking was still allowed, rear projection was superior, but these days it's no real difference.
Well, 35mm is a different world altogether, really. To start with, when we receive the film, it isn't on spools. It comes on in metal cans. It did at that time. These days, the latest ones we've used here, some of them come in plastic cans, but we've had to put them on reels ourselves. The reels were about 2,000-foot reels, which lasted about 20 minutes, approximately, because there wasn't. It did vary a little bit in length, the spools did, and we had to make sure it was all in the right order.
Technologies have to be made to fit. They have to be made to fit. And cinema fits something that is very old. Almost every human culture that we know about, and certainly those we choose to call advanced, all have dramatic performance. Modes of dramatic performance. Cinema's roots are in the mechanisation of the theatrical experience for the mass audiences of the late 19th century, right? First moving pictures, 1861, right? You know, why 1895? Because in 1895, that was the first year when the American vaudeville industry, live entertainment, popular entertainment industry, sold $1 million of seats a week. Time to mechanize, right? So what did they mechanize? Well, they mechanized the same experience. Now they added to it, because you couldn't sit in a theatre and see, you know, shots taken from the front of a moving train. Obviously they expanded it, but they didn't replace it.
The whole industry is converted to digital now. I think they're doing less than 20 35mm prints for a big release now. The reason it's all gone over to digital is for cost on the distributor side. Sending us a hard drive with a film on costs them about £100, whereas when they used to do 35mm prints, they used to cost about £1,500 a print. So when you're looking across the whole country, it saves the distributors an awful lot of money. I mean, from our side, the digital offers a fantastic picture and sound. We don't have to worry about prints arriving damaged. We don't have to worry about them picking up dirt and debris over the weeks. So when you come and see a film on the 10th week, it looks as good as it did on the first night you showed it.
It's taken the craft of projection completely out of the cinema industry.
Oh, it has, definitely.
Yeah.
Because with film, when we had problems, we could often repair it ourselves, and we didn't have to get anybody in. I mean, if you got a film break, well, all you had to do was lace up again. And sometimes I've had the film break and haven't even had to stop the projector.
I think the one thing that you could say, though, is that, and Bob will endorse this, I'm sure, that when 35mm was in use, you were completely dependent on the quality of the print as to how good the film would look on the screen. And if you had one that had been used, you know, several times, it was often very scratched and jumpy, and the sound wasn't clear. But with digital, everything is crystal clear and it looks perfect, whether you've shown it for the first time or whether it's been played 100 times. I think that's a big plus. Wouldn't you agree?
It is, yes.
.3D, right? 3D is upon us, right? Do you know when the first glasses were, the red and green glasses? Still photographs in the 1870s, I think. So it'll happen any minute now, because we're in a revolutionary situation. Not.
First 3D films were way back in the 50s.
Yeah.
And you had to wear the coloured glasses.
But, you know, that hasn't improved, in my view, at any rate, that hasn't improved the quality of the film. And until such time as they actually get that right, I'm not entirely sure that just ramping up the resolution is going to make that much difference. I think it's perhaps more interestingly, I suspect that when live streaming is available and you don't have any need to put a film onto a server in the cinema, you can just get it off a server farm somewhere in Silicon Valley and download it over the internet wirelessly in real time. I suspect you may then see the idea of the big multiplex starting to change.
I think cinema audiences have been on a plateau for around about 10 years now. This is recently also because of the emergence of video-on-demand services such as Love Film and Netflix, which have increased around about 123% in the last 2 to 3 years. You know, this is a problem industry-wide, obviously bigger chains and obviously independent cinemas as well, because there's a greater cross-platform availability for audiences to either watch at home or on their mobile devices. For instance, we know that the percentage of adults between demographic ages 15 to 24 have decreased from 31% to 25% in the past 3 years as well. And obviously this is a younger generational thing. I think you know, the access because of technology is having an effect on cinema audiences. But saying that, also we have an increase in the amount of films that are being shown within cinemas. and that's increased from just over 300 films in 2001 to over 627 in 2012. So the choice has obviously been greater for our audiences, but I think the problem is for cinemas industry-wide now is to understand how to grow audiences and how to actually approach that. And I think that is a lot to do with how we look at our data and our data collection. So I think that is an industry-wide problem which people are looking to solve at the moment.
The technology of the cinema has always been overly complicated. It's a barrier to entry, as the economists put it. They went for 35mm, didn't bother with 16, certainly didn't bother with anything smaller. Okay, they had big audiences, but even so, they could have made it more portable. They went to a colour system, which was absolutely absurd. The Hollywood studios, when they went to colour in the 30s, were completely dominated by the widow of the man who invented it, by Natalie Kalmus. She gets all the credits on the classic Hollywood movies, And she would walk in and say, "Oh, I don't like this set, rebuild it, different colours," right? I mean, why did they do that? Because nobody could do Technicolor. Everybody could do Kodachrome. Right? So a sound, they went for optical sound instead of magnetic sound. The Germans had magnetic sound. They've at every stage, the industry has gone for the more expensive option, which means that everybody outside that option, whether in production, exhibition, distribution or exhibition, wherever they are, everybody outside that mainstream is always going to be marginalised and struggle.
It seems to me that there's only so much resolution one can actually put into a film before you have to start fiddling with it, because there's too much detail. And I did hear someone say recently that the problem with 4K is that it's so clear. You can actually, in close-ups, you can see the hairs growing out of people's noses, and they have to kind of fuzz that a bit when they put it through the editing suite in post-production to make sure that that's not visible, because people, they don't. That's not what the audience wants to see.
I think that when you look at the current range of developments like 4K, or indeed moving holography, there's an inevitable trajectory. The culture is actually built in to do that. It's also built in to do it quite slowly. The earliest experiments are in the 70s, right? And people are and we've known what the agenda is. I, for instance, have not got a television at this time because I've been waiting for 4K. I thought it was pointless buying HD, which was 35mm. Why bother with that? I'll wait for the next best thing. Apparently 4K is not the end. But somewhere there's a limit and it'll look real. And at that point, you've got all sorts of interesting questions, right? Especially if it's holographic, right? I mean, the cynic in me says, well, if it's holographic and it looks real, isn't it the theatre, right? So I think that, of course, inevitably that will happen. Inevitably. The price will fall, people will have it. It's just a better way of delivering them the traditional material. When I say traditional material, I'm not sticking the mud. I mean, that changes, but very slowly.
There is nothing to beat watching a film with a lot of people in the same room. It's a shared experience, it's a social experience, and you don't get the same effect when you're downloading it onto your computer or your internet television or even your phone. Films were meant to be seen by lots of people simultaneously, and even though I think live streaming is likely to change that to some extent, there is still some magic in the air when you sit down in a theatre full of people and the lights go down and the film comes up and you think to yourself, oh, here we go.
The practice of cinema will remain. The film box office is 115 billion, right? Broadway and Shaftesbury Avenue, the live theatre, they took millions too, not billions, but they certainly took millions. So why? Well, because people like going up west to watch a live show, right? So that should have disappeared a century ago. So in the same way, the independent cinemas might finish up actually being, it might cease to be worthwhile for mainstream conglomerate media giants to actually run cinemas at all. And maybe only the independents will be left to provide you with somewhere to take your boyfriend or girlfriend.
Audience demand for viewing pleasure and engagement hasn't diminished despite advancement in cinema techniques. This relationship with cinema goers is helping independents survive in many cases, but also embrace further developments. perhaps now the stage is set for independence to be the dominant force in cinema viewership.